name is Morgan Kennon, and I am a graduating senior in the honors program here at Georgia Southern University. I'll be graduating with a psychology degree, and my thesis is over ego-depletion and religiosity. But before getting started, I would like to give a special thanks to my supervisor, Dr. J.D. Wilson. So people sometimes engage in activities that require them to exert more self-control than they would on a typical basis. And it's important to note that engaging in these activities can leave a person feeling mentally and or physically exhausted. So some situations or examples where you would need to use more self-control than normal would be continuing on a long homework assignment after getting discouraged, or even denying a food craving for junk food. A group of researchers led by Schmeichel argued that self-control is a limited resource, and that once it's depleted, it can affect how well that you perform on tasks that follow. Baumeister referred to this diminished performance on subsequent tasks after exercising self-control as ego-depletion. Baumeister and Vohs proposed that ego-depletion could be separated into different categories or domains, and they also claimed that each domain of ego-depletion shares the same source of self-control, so it doesn't matter which sphere is being targeted. But the researchers wanted to determine if there were certain tasks that require more self-control than others. It was determined by Hagsger and his colleagues that more complex cognitive processes deplete self-control more effectively than others. So these are the 7 different areas of ego-depletion, and I'm not going to go into detail on each and every one. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, and I provided examples, but I did want to quickly differentiate between controlling attention and controlling thoughts, because those can be easily mixed up. So in a situation where you're studying for a test, if you're trying to ignore distracting information in your surrounding environment, so people coming in and out and trying to talk to you, this is going to fall under controlling attention because you're having to ignore all of the things going on in your surroundings. Versus a situation where you're studying for a test and having to keep your mind from wandering to focus, this is going to fall under controlling thoughts because you're having to suppress your own distracting inner monologue. So again, the biggest difference is just where the distracting information is coming from, either in your surroundings, which is going to fall under controlling attention, or in your head, and that's going to fall under controlling thoughts. But the area of ego-depletion that this study focuses on is cognitive processing. And this includes working in reverse memory. So if you're given a number sequence and you're introduced to the numbers one by one and then asked to not only recall those numbers, but then recall them in reverse order, this is going to fall into this category. Also, an encoding task where you're given a reading passage and then asked to cross out all of the A's in that reading passage. This is also going to fall into this category of cognitive processing because you're not only having to read the reading passage, but also pay attention to each A and cross them out as you go. And the last part, or the last task that I included in the cognitive processing area is going to be a difficult puzzle. And the example I have is a street task. If you're not familiar with this task, essentially it's where you are given a list of words and specifically colors. So you're given words, blue, yellow, green, but all of the words are in different colors. So for instance, the word blue is going to be written in the word yellow. And your natural impulse and your natural response is going to be to read the word blue, but instead, during this task, you're asked to describe the color that the word is written in. So instead of saying the word blue, you're saying yellow because that's the color that the word is written in. The next step for researchers was to determine if self-control could be regained once it was lost. Hagsger offered that self-control is regained after a night's sleep. But other experiments have shown that positive stimuli, such as a gift, a calming nature scene, or a positive self-talk can actually buffer against the effects of ego-depletion. So these are some of the lab studies that incorporated the positive stimuli I mentioned on the last slide, which were a gift, a calming nature scene, or a positive self-talk. Now, while I don't have time to go into detail on each of the individual studies, they all had the same general layout, which was an ego-depletion task to begin with, the introduction of a positive stimulus, and then a measure of persistence. And the results from all of the studies showed that the introduction of the positive stimulus helped the participants that were ego depleted to perform just as well, as not better, on the persistence task as those who were not ego depleted. Self-talk is a particularly special stimulus because it is a skill that can be taught. The results of a lab study conducted by Gregerson and colleagues showed that the individuals who were taught self-talk skills had faster reaction times and it had a higher number of correct answers in all of the persistence measures. But just as self-talk can encourage a person to persist on a difficult task, praying or being able to talk with God can serve the same purpose. A researcher named Bland describes how certain religious practices like prayer or meditation can actually reinforce self-control. So when religious individuals interact with a religious stimulus, they are more likely to be able to regulate their self-control and thus buffer against the effects of ego depletion. And this is because people who are engaged in these activities regularly ignore distracting information to focus on the practice at hand. Taking into consideration the research on prayer and religiosity as they relate to self-control, we examined the possibility that reading a passage of prayer can restore lost self-control. We expected that the effects of ego depletion would be reduced the most by reading the religious passage, followed by the self-talk passage, and then a neutral passage. We also anticipated that trait religiosity would help indicate effectiveness of prayer on self-control. The ego depletion task used in this study was a subtraction task. The task began with the researcher instructing the participant to start at the number 737 and subtract by 8 out loud until asked to stop. The participants were unaware, though, that the researcher was trying to further frustrate them by asking them to stop after 30 seconds because they weren't subtracting fast enough. After starting over at 737, the participant was allowed to subtract for another 2 minutes. Then, the participant was asked again to stop, start over, but starting over beginning at the number 685. The total time for this task was 5 minutes and 30 seconds. After completing the ego depletion task, all of the participants received a reading passage based on the group that they were in. The experimental group was given a Bible verse, which was Isaiah 40, 28 through 31 from the New International Version, but were not told that the reading passage they had was a Bible verse. The self-talk group received a positive self-talk reading passage that was in first person and had similar wording to the Bible verse, but had no reference to God. And the control group received a neutral reading passage that had similar wording to the Bible verse, but was in third person and had no reference to God. After reading their assigned passage, all of the participants were given an anagram task to measure persistence. The participants were instructed to persist on the task for as long as possible, but they had the choice to quit whenever they wanted to. The participants were not told that they had a maximum amount of 20 minutes on the task. When the researcher was alerted, time spent on the task was recorded and added as the measure of persistence. The initial analysis of our study did not have any significant results. This may have been due to the fact that the participants in the experiment group were unaware that the passage they were reading was a Bible verse. Also, our ego-depleting task may not have been strenuous enough to effectively deplete the ego. We used surveys to determine that reported religiosity positively correlated with self-reported self-control. This can be explained by Bland's claim that religion may actually act as an exercise that can build up a person's self-control. Our study aimed to determine if personal prayer in the form of a Bible verse could help buffer against the effects of ego depletion. Although our initial analysis did not have any significant results, there was a moderate, significant correlation between trait self-control and religiosity. These results, along with all of the prior research, support the idea that religion and self-control are not only related, but religious practices can help build up long-term self-control. I would like to thank everybody for listening in to my thesis presentation, and I would once again like to thank the honors program and my wonderful supervisor, Dr. Janie Wilson.